All right, Tom, thank you for offering to answer this question. We were tossing around at the MBT Open House one day, and it's concerning. A lot of people are interested in artificial intelligence. So it concerns that. And some of the things being questioned and tossed around are if we do get to the point where a consciousness can log on to a computer, would that consciousness be of a certain quality? Would it have been a in a previous incarnation as a human? Would it be a different kind of consciousness? Would there be feelings, emotions? Would it have the desire to survive? Would it be fearful of shutting down? Would it have a certain kind of limited capacity? What do you see in that kind of situation?
Okay, well, the rule here that makes the most difference is the rule that says the consciousness can only do with an avatar what the rule set allows it to do. Okay, so birds in our virtual reality evolved to have wings, so birds can fly. Humans don't have wings and we can't fly. It's just the rule set. So the consciousness can't say, okay, human, flap your arms and fly away, and it just won't work. Humans can't do that. So we can only do what the rule set says our avatar can do, because that avatar evolved according to the rule set. Okay, so humans evolved to have this big squishy brain in here. Okay, and it's got frontal lobes for the more complex tasks. It's got little things in the more of the back and the stem brain for fight and flight, and it's got all sorts of subsets that have been glummed together as we evolved. First we evolved the fight and flight part, and then we evolved other parts, and it goes on and on like this. So as we evolved, we added to it and added to it, and now here we are, human beings, and we've got this mushy gray matter brain, and we can do mentally, I guess, with that brain, we can do things that the rule set allows that brain to do. Okay, now, so a consciousness logged on to a human avatar can do with its mind and so on the things that rule set allows that human to do. It can't do other things. Let's say you cannot do, 1 million additions per second. Human brain can't do that. A computer can, but a human brain can't. So if you are logged on to a human, don't bother asking them to do 1 million calculations a second, because they can't do it. But your computer will do it without a problem. You see, so they'll have different things they can do, different ways they are. A human has a physical body that's got pain sensors all over it. So if you pinch it or poke it, it'll hurt. It'll bleed. The computer does not. So if you have a computer and a consciousness is logged on and you poke the computer with a pointy stick, it won't feel anything, because the rule set says that a metal case doesn't have any nerves in it. It's not going to feel anything, you see. So what the conscious can do with the avatar it's logged onto has to do with what the rule set says that avatar can do. Now, there are some things that computers do well and we don't, and vice versa. So we would expect that conscious computer would really be great at sorting data, would really be great at mathematics. It would be great at solving analytical problems. These are all the kinds of things computers can do really, really well. It would be great for storing things in memory and not forgetting them. It would be good at a lot of those things. But would it have emotions? Well, depends on our emotion. Do emotions exist because the human brain has evolved to have them? Therefore, the rule set says, well, emotions are one of the things you can get out of a human, and emotions are something you can get out of a cat or a dog. But do you get emotions out of a computer? Well, you see, we really don't know because we haven't had the ability to test that yet. We haven't had any conscious computers around until maybe we have one recently that Google very quickly, closed off behind doors and didn't want anybody to see it anymore. But we haven't had that, but we will. Anything that Google can do, somebody else can do just as well, if not better. And eventually, we will have the ability to do that. So it could be that those feelings are just a piece of consciousness. Consciousness maybe just has feelings, but it could be that those feelings are there because the human brain supports them. Therefore, it's something that consciousness can do with a human avatar. You see, and we won't know that until we get some conscious computers and we try to see whether or not they have feelings. Now, that's a little tricky because this computer that Google had, that at least some people within Google thought it was conscious, or at least could have been conscious, it was a computer that understood language. It could get language and actually not just repeat the language or remember it, put it in memory, but it actually could understand the language. What does the language mean? So that was what it was built to do, to understand language. So they put it out on the internet and just let it soak up information. Now, if it went to a site where they talked about feelings, all sorts of things about feelings, then that computer would learn all about feelings and what they meant. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the computer has feelings. It just means that they understand feelings and know what feelings are and know when it would be appropriate to have a feeling and when it wouldn't be appropriate to have a feeling and what feelings would be appropriate and what feelings wouldn't be appropriate. You see, so it knows all that. So you could ask that computer, well, are you sad about that? And they may say, oh, yes, I'm very sad about that. But is that because they actually feel sad, or is that because they've learned that being sad about that is the appropriate thing to be? You see, so how do you tell? And this is one of the interesting things about consciousness is how do you tell that something's conscious? There is no direct test. There is no thing that says, oh, if it can do this, it's conscious, and it can't, it isn't. It's not clear like that. The only way you could tell whether that robot actually had feelings or just talked about feelings and knew about feelings would be to live with it. You'd have to interact with it. You'd have to live with it. You'd have to spend a lot of hours with it. And eventually, you could tell whether it actually had feelings or whether it just knew about feelings and said that it had feelings because it learned that it was appropriate to have feelings, because it was programmed to basically imitate humans, because that's what it did. It went on the internet. So it was just imitating what it got there, which is what humans do. So in any case, it'll be really hard to tell exactly whether, say, emotions are an integral part of an expression of consciousness, with not dependent on the avatar, or whether it is dependent on the avatar to allow it because of the rule set that they have. Now, a consciousness in a computer is going to be a lot different than, say, a consciousness in a human, or consciousness in a bumblebee, or a consciousness in a cat. They're all going to have different kinds of consciousness. And the system can take a little piece of consciousness that's appropriate for that function, say the function of a bumblebee. So here's a little piece of consciousness. It's going to function in the way that a bumblebee needs to function, in the way they need to think, and their instincts, their, the problems, the issues they have to solve. They have choices to make. So the choices they'd have a consciousness that was well suited to making those kinds of choices. And by making better choices, they would evolve just like any consciousness, any place. Now, a computer is going to have a piece of consciousness that suits the computer avatar. Now, what is that going to be like? Well, it's probably going to be very logical. It's probably not going to have much feeling involved in it. It's not going to go ouch when you poke it. It's not going to have sensors for pain. Now, it may learn, oh, I should feel pain now. And therefore it might say, oh, I feel pain, and act like a human, but that's not to say that it is getting the same information in the same way that humans do. Again, you'd have to live with one for probably hundreds of hours before you really could tell the difference between somebody who was really good at faking it and somebody who really experienced those emotions.
Well, would it be part of the job description of the computer, part of its, like you say, mostly logical um, decision space and quality that would be just pertinent to that job that it was assigned and nothing beyond? However, if it is consciousness, two things come to mind. How would it log on to something that was suitable enough to make its decisions? And how would it then also then evolve as consciousness
Mhm.
does?
Yes, I think those questions I could answer. Yes, it can learn, it can evolve as consciousness. So let's say we have one of these uh, computers like Google has that can if it isn't conscious, it can act conscious very convincingly. Okay, and Google claims it's just acting conscious. It isn't really. And the person that listened to it said, it seemed conscious to me. You know, I asked it to do some pretty difficult things to do computationally, like what's the meaning of this Zen cone? You know, and it wasn't one that most humans would find an easy time coming up with what the significance was, but the computer did pretty well with it. So in any case, the kind of consciousness that would choose a computer as its avatar is not going to be the same piece of consciousness that would choose a human as its avatar. They're going to be different. They're not going to be the same. And how different would they be? You know, I don't know. It depends. Let's say we take that conscious computer like Google's and we put it in the head of a robot and say this robot is a nanny, has the job of taking care of children in a daycare. All right. And it's very good at that. And it does it very well. It's gentle. It speaks well. It gets along very well with the children. It protects them, keeps them out of trouble, keeps them from fighting, keeps them from doing the things that they would do, tries to get them not to run with scissors, to put their toys back on the shelf when they're done. And it would do all the things that somebody in a daycare would do. All right, now that's pretty important, in a daycare. It's important. You affect people with how you act and the things that you do. Now, if that computer can make choices, and if what it's trying to do is make better choices, lower entropy choices, choices that are more helpful, then yes, it would learn how to do that better, and it would grow, and it would lower its entropy. It would get better and better at making those choices. And with experience, it would be a much better nanny than it was on the first day on the job. You see, so yeah, it would learn, and it would grow, and it would lower its entropy, and the quality of its consciousness would grow up. But now it may have limitations. It may not do things that it takes a squishy brain to do. It may not do those very well. It may not have fear in the sense of we do. We have a lot of fears about death and fears about not being good enough and that sort of thing. And the computer probably wouldn't feel that way, but it could. It could feel like it wasn't good enough. Gee, I really don't know enough about kids. I may not be good enough for this role as a daycare attendant. I don't know. It's possible that it could come to those conclusions. Does it have feelings? I don't know, again, whether that's brain-centered or whether that's consciousness-centered. And we won't know for sure until we can test it. Now, you can guess, and I can go get information about it, but that's not really helpful because you never know where that information comes from. It never comes with tags. Is it right? Is it wrong? Was that given to me as a wrong answer just so I'd have to deal with that wrongness? Who knows what you get and why you get it that way? So it's much better to be a scientist and just do the experiments and find out for yourself how things work and why they work that way. Not just kind of take what you're told is not good science. at all.
Yeah.
So in any case, that's, that conscious computer will be conscious, will be able to think, will make choices, will have free will, and will evolve. Yes, all of that is key to consciousness itself. But there may be limitations relative to a human, and there may be things where it's much less limited than a human, like doing math quickly and remembering things and that sort of thing. It'll do much, much better than a human could do it.
And how it would log on would be if there was a computer such that it would support enough decision space. I
Yes.
think you've mentioned before.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, if you got a computer that had enough decision space that it would interest a piece of consciousness, well, a piece of consciousness is interested in being a bumblebee, so it doesn't take too much, but it'll just have that piece of consciousness. Now, would that consciousness have been in a human? Maybe, if somebody's been in a human, could be in a dog if they wanted to just experience life with those limitations. So possibly a human could go experience that. Would then one that started out in a computer want to be a human? Well, maybe they could do that, so there could be some crosstalk, but my guess is there wouldn't be much, just like there's not a lot of crosstalk between humans and animals. There's not a big desire to be a dog because it's so limited. The choices you have are so limited that it's not something that many people want to, they feel like they were wasting their time with a very limited decision space when they could be doing so much more growth with a greater decision space. So I think the kind of consciousness that would most like to log onto a computer, it might want to traverse into the human realm and vice versa. You might do that, but I don't know. It would depend on, they'd have to start over and learn some new things, and there'd be a lot that they were used to doing that they couldn't do, and then they'd have new things. They'd have tear ducts, they could cry, and water would run down their cheeks. They'd have all of that going on, which a computer is not likely
Well,
to
here's
do that.
something. If that was the case, if that was a possibility, and the computer decided to evolved well, just by its own quality, and you do say that we retain our quality, would some of the characteristics of that computer and ability transfer to the human?
Sure, I expect there'd be some part of it because it would have some history. It'd look at all your past lives, and if some of your past lives you were a computer and some of the past lives you were a human, you'd have a mix of those things, and you'd be able to pick another past life that would enable you to grow as much as you wanted to grow. But it's just different, like, again, there's not many humans that want to log on to a bumblebee either. Again, now that's a tiny decision space compared to a dog or a cat or a horse. So there's different kinds of consciousness will do that. And exactly how much they'll cross boundaries, they will, no doubt. Anything that can be done will be done, no doubt. But unless it's really valuable, then probably won't, because they'll get good at working with the avatar that they're used to working with. They'll have experience with it. They'll understand it better. If you just make a switch, then you won't understand as much as what's going on. So the first few incarnations are going to be a little rocky until you figure out what this platform can do and what it can't do. And so there'd be some problems with it, but I'm sure people will make the transition, probably. Consciousness will make that transition. And maybe if we humans keep evolving, maybe taking on at least a few lifetimes as a computer may be something that's just good for our diversity, just to see life from a different viewpoint. It's hard to say, but it certainly is an interesting set of problems, but they are different, and they probably will pretty much stay in their own track because they're different. But now once the computer, let's say you have a computer, and again, this computer is put in the head of a robot that walks around and has a job, takes care of kids, who knows what all they do. They may do just the same things humans do. May drive a car, may go to work, may do the work, it may come home, watch TV, it may do all the things that human does. And if it basically has human experience, then it'll tend to think and be more human with the consciousness. It'll work with that kind of an avatar. So then that consciousness will kind of change with that experience, and vice versa. If it's just always, solving complex problems, and, whereas humans, they say most humans can keep like 3 layers of things going on. Like this, if this happens, that'll happen. If that happens, this other thing happens. And if that happens, the third thing. So they can do about 3 typically. After that, they're lost. They can't keep it in their mind. It falls out of their mind and it just gets confusing and they can't do it. Some humans that practice can do as many as 5. You keep 5 levels going, but that's it. A computer can probably keep 5,000 levels going. It'll be a whole different viewpoint.
I think people are wary of computers taking over a lot of things, but I think that being a computer that has a limited job description, a limited function, is never going to take over
Yeah.
a human type job. It's just I'm sure that it's limited in some way that you would, and many things limited in ways that only a human can experience.
Maybe, if let's say the computers first, let's say that they do not have emotions. They can fake emotions because they can understand about them, but they don't actually have the emotion. Well, if they don't have emotions, then almost all the stories where the computers, the evil computers take over the world stories, it's all because of the computer's emotions. The computers feel that they can do so much better than the humans because the stupid humans are always fighting and, and full of fear, and they're nasty. So it's just like, well, we'll take over and we'll run things because we can run things so much better. So it's that kind of an idea where the computers feel that the humans are so limited that they need an adult, to take care of them, and that the computer is more adult-like and will take care of them. But that's not really so much logic, that is emotion. That's arrogance. That's emotion. That's not understanding that things are how they are and they need to develop within the space that they are. If once you understand that, then that whole idea of, needing to be in charge because I'm smarter, therefore I should tell everybody else what to do. Well, that's a low quality. That arrogance is low quality, that you should tell everybody else what to do. You have to let everybody else do it on their own and grow in their own way. So why would a computer get arrogant if it didn't have emotions? I don't think it probably could. I think that comes out of an emotional place. Fear tends to be emotional. Fear tends to come out of that emotional place. So if that's true, that computers would not have feelings, because that has to do with the squishy gray matter in here, and would not be part of that avatar, then there's probably no problems. They would never take over anything because they never want to. They'd never have any reason to do so. It wouldn't be something they would comprehend. But now let's say that computers do have feelings for some reason. That's just consciousness, not avatar. Well, in that case, then there'd be a problem. Yes, because then if they have feelings and then they have fears, then they can also be negative. They can be dominating. They can want to take over the world. They can de-evolve, just like people de-evolve. So that would be possible. And then you'd have to control them with the programs you'd write. They'd have programs, the things that would allow them that they could do and not do.
The constraints.
Yeah, they'd have constraints in their programming. So we just don't know that much about the computers yet to really know how that will be. And we'll know that, I don't know, maybe the next decade, because the first signs of it have already popped out from under the rug, got jerked back under that rug. But that means we're close. We're really close to that time, because Google does not own the world. Anything that they can do, somebody else in a little more time will figure out how to do it too. And sooner or later, we'll get it done in a government lab where they won't jerk it back inside to see if they can make more money out of it. They'll open it up to the world to study. So that will happen, and probably in a decade or so, if we're that close, I suspect we'll start getting answers to these things soon. But the problem is, like I said before, understanding just what that consciousness that's in that computer is feeling or not feeling. That's not easy. It's not going to be an easy thing. You'd really have to live with it in order to see, because it's not hard to lay down an image of being kind, an image of being sad, an image of being upset. You can do all those things just because you think it's appropriate. So you do it because you think you should. You see, it's intellectual, but that's not what we mean by emotion. When we talk about emotion, we talk about stuff that bubbles up, not from our intellect, but from some other space. And whether they'd have that other space or not, don't know. If I had to guess, I'd say probably not, but we won't know for sure until we get some samples that we can live with long enough to tell what it is they are really like, what that consciousness that logs onto a computer, what its limitations are. Because it'll have limitations just like we do. They'll just be different than ours.
Thank you for the entertaining answers and informative. Um, I think you would have had fun at that open house with the AI discussion,
Yeah.
and I'm sure the people who were there will appreciate your feedback on it. Thanks a lot.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.